Thanks everyone for joining us again. This is Matt King from the Office of Privacy and Data Protection. And I'm going to start today's meeting by talking about the 2020 Privacy Assessment findings and recommendations. I know quite a few of you are very familiar with the assessment, but I want to go through some background for those of you who are not. So one of the main reasons that we conduct this assessment is because it's one of the primary duties assigned to us in our authorizing statute, which says that we shall conduct an annual privacy review of state agencies. So in past years, and again this year, we have chosen to do that by way of a survey that goes out to agencies for completion. The overall goal of the assessment is to establish a common understanding of agency practices and privacy maturity. And by having that understanding, we're able to tailor our efforts and make sure that we're developing resources and providing support where it is most needed. I do want to call out that the goal is not to impose new requirements or measure compliance with specific laws or standards. We know that the agencies here and across the state perform a lot of different functions and are subject to a variety of different laws and regulations for how they protect information. And so there isn't a one-size-fits-all approach, but we do want to gather as much information as possible about what's actually happening in practice. And the other thing I wanted to call out is we also tried to align it as much as possible with the recently finalized Washington State Agency privacy principles, which you can see up there, but I know Katy is going to talk about it a little bit more later, so I'll leave it there for now. We conducted the survey this year by sending it out in the summer together with the OCIO's annual certification to make sure that it was getting to the correct points of contact and that we were coordinating with the rest of WATEC, and gathered responses this fall and have been working on putting that all together and analyzing the responses. As Angela mentioned, we have a report now. It's out there on OPDP's website, which I think is watec.wa.gov/privacy, or if you go to privacy.wa.gov, it will redirect you to that website. So we'll be going over many of the highlights from the report, but feel free to go out there for more reading after we're done. I wanted to call out a couple of caveats to the report and the responses before we go further. The first is that there was a little bit of a fluid response timeline. We had an original due date, and then it was pushed back, and then responses continued to come in after that, which is great. We want to hear from all agencies, but because of that, you might notice some discrepancies in data and what I talked about today versus specific numbers that are in the report. But just wanted to call out we're aware of that, but none of them are big discrepancies, and the general, I guess the general tone of it is the same. And then I also want to talk about a little bit of the limitations of the way we do this. Obviously, because it's just a survey saying kind of, do you have this or do you not have this? It is only giving us quantitative results. So we are gathering, how many people have training, for example, but we're not attempting to measure whether that's good training or how effective it is. And we also have some limitations just on the fact that it's self-reported. We're not out there talking to every agency when they complete this. And some of these topics are pretty complicated. So it's possible that there are areas where we still have an opportunity to better understand exactly what we want from the questions and what different responses should look like. So with that being out of the way, let's go to participation. So we set this out to 88 agencies this year and received responses from 74, which is a 84% response rate, and is also up 9 agencies since the 2019 assessment. So that's great. We definitely want to hear from everybody. And of those 74 agencies, 61 indicated that they maintain personal information. So for the agencies that don't, we didn't ask them to go any further. So in giving their answers, so the report is really talking just about those 61 agencies. And when we talk about personal information, we use this really broad, generic definition, defining it as information about a person that is identifiable to that specific individual. We wanted to make sure we are encompassing, the various ways that that's defined in different laws and in practice. And obviously, it can include just really minimal information, like contact information. But what we found is that most agencies aren't maintaining, just that like very basic information. They're maintaining very sensitive personal information. So, over 40 agencies, for example, have social security numbers or dates of birth or employment information. So the point here is really just that this is very sensitive information, and it is important for these agencies to have strong privacy controls. We asked about how different agencies staff privacy. We know that historically there have been requests for additional funding across the state enterprise for privacy functions. And we changed the question a little bit this year to try to understand exactly what's happening in practice. In the past, there had been a question of whether agencies had a designated privacy officer, and last year 13 agencies said yes. But we know that there could be people in charge of privacy, even if they don't call themselves or their title is not privacy officer. So we broadened it a little bit. And there were 9 agencies who reported they have a designated person to set policy and handle privacy questions, whose primary function is privacy. And then another 14 have a person who's officially designated, even though privacy is not their primary function. So when you add those together, the 23, it does seem like it's potentially an increase over just the last year. And that's what we would expect just based on the general direction of privacy. We asked some questions about policies and training, thinking of these as some really foundational controls for privacy, in that even if you have people who understand the issues, you really need to set policies that are documented and really, demonstrate your understanding and commitments of how you're going to protect information. And then to have trainings that talk about those policies and make sure that staff understand what those commitments are and are put in a position to carry them out. So the good news here is that the vast majority of agencies do have formal privacy policies. There are 45 that reported having them now, and then quite a few others that indicated they're in the process, and only 8 that don't. So I think that's definitely positive movement. We also asked about a couple different specific types of policies. One, it was data minimization policies, just thinking of that as a real bedrock of privacy, and one of our state agency privacy principles that should apply to all agencies, regardless of the functions that they're performing. And there were 30 agencies that had data minimization policies. And of the ones that didn't report having them, some of them did indicate that they have the concepts incorporated in other policies. And then we also asked about policies that talk about particularly sensitive information. So here the idea is just that there are certain subcategories of information that might deserve even higher levels of protection, thinking of things like substance use disorder information, or possibly information about children, victims of domestic violence, immigrants. And so not all agencies would need these types of policies, but if you do have them, it really shows that you've taken the extra step of understanding what those subsets are, and documenting how you're going to hold them to greater protection, a greater level of protection. When we got to training, we found that there were less agencies that have taken the step of developing training than agencies that have adopted formal policies. So there were 36 agencies of the 61 with personal information that offer privacy training. And then when you got into more details about what that training looked like, there were only 12 that indicated the training was specific to that agency and the laws that applied to that agency. So obviously, any training at all is a good thing for people to understand the general concepts with how to protect information, but the more tailored it can be to the actual information that an agency has and the actual policies that they've implemented, the better. We asked questions about transparency, and there are lots of ways that agencies can be transparent about how they gather and use and share information. But the one that we really focused on was just whether they have some type of privacy notice or notice of privacy practices that puts people really on clear notice of exactly what's happening. And approximately half of the agencies that have personal information also indicated that they do have a privacy notice of some type, and those are distributed in different ways, sometimes posted on a website and sometimes handed out in person or mailed, and obviously that's going to vary with the type of information being gathered and the function that the agency is performing. But the fact that we had over half of agencies with some type of notice was good. We next asked about individual participation. So again, this is another one of our state agency privacy principles. And it's also something, as are a lot of these topics, that you're going to see over and over again in legislation, both in Washington State and where we've seen big progress on privacy laws in the past, in GDPR and in California, individual participation and the idea that a person has control of their own information is a huge emphasis. So we know it's not appropriate for all government functions. Obviously, we have records retention requirements, and so the idea of just deleting information doesn't necessarily apply to state agencies. Similarly, it's not always going to be appropriate for someone to be able to correct their information, especially if you think about a function where the government is licensing a person or taking action against a person, making civil commitments or those types of things. Then the idea that someone could just ask for their information to be changed obviously isn't going to be very workable. But you can still have processes that talk about how you're going to handle those types of requests when they come in. So overall, 33 agencies had some type of process for at least one of these different things that you see listed. And the most common type of process was about correcting information. But there are also a lot of agencies that had some type of process for people to access or receive information about themselves, which makes sense because agencies also have those types of obligations under the Public Records Act. We asked quite a few questions about accountability on the assessment. We did also gather information about where or what agencies had experienced incidents or data breaches, although that's something that's more just informational and we didn't feel like was appropriate to report on. But we did want to share the results about controls that agencies have in place to detect incidents when they happen. I think sometimes agencies are not inclined to say that they have had incidents or breaches because it has a stigma that's associated with it. But the reality is that it's very possible that if you are not finding incidents or not having any type of breach, then it may mean that you're just not detecting them. And similarly, if you share information with a lot of third parties, and you're not having third-party incidents, that again, it could mean that those third parties either aren't detecting them or that you don't have strong controls in your contracts for them to report them to you. So there was some good news here, though, in terms of the controls that agencies have in place. 87% of the agencies with personal information reported that they have one or more people who are specifically designated to make breach determinations, which is great because that helps ensure consistency, that someone has more of a holistic view of what's going on and can kind of evaluate different incidents against each other. And that is definitely something that helps with accountability. But we were a little surprised that less than half of the agencies have templates or tools to document and guide breach determinations. So having that type of documented process and tool can again help ensure consistency and make sure that the right factors are always being considered. Agencies, as most of you are probably aware, share a lot of information, especially amongst themselves. So over 50 agencies reported sharing information with other state and local agencies to fulfill their functions. And then there are also quite a few agencies that shared with federal agencies or with their own vendors. That data sharing is obviously an important part of fulfilling our obligations and performing efficient government functions, but we should be making sure that we have due diligence and that all that sharing is appropriate. So we asked about data sharing controls, and 46 agencies reported having some type of review process to make sure that contracting, privacy, and security are considered before entering a new data sharing relationship. And 39 agencies have taken the further step of designating specific people to approve data sharing. And then there are 8 agencies that have taken the step of actually establishing a committee to review data share requests, which is not something that's always going to be appropriate. But when it is possible, again, it really helps with consistency and the idea that there's sort of a core group of people who see all the data sharing that's going on and can make sure they're taking a holistic view of what is approved or not approved. And then we also talked about controls, not for necessarily data that's shared, but instead data that's published and what agencies are doing to make sure that when they put information out there for the public, that they're not accidentally releasing private information. So 25 agencies have adopted some type of de-identification standard, and 12 has some type of small number standard, which is just the idea that as there are smaller counts in reported information, it's more likely that someone could be re-identified from it. And then 19 agencies also have some type of privacy review of that published data that's conducted before it goes out to the public. It's hard to appropriately protect information if you don't know what it is and where it's located and what it's being used for. So we asked about whether agencies have a data inventory or data map. And there were 21 agencies that indicated they do, and another 21 that indicated this effort's in progress. So again, when you add that up and you get 42 agencies that are either already have it or are working on it, that's great progress. And agencies are also busy planning new privacy tasks for 2021. You can see the numbers here, but about half of agencies from the looks of it are planning on revamping everything they do with privacy. So this is obviously can be a big undertaking, and I think an area where we will be able to provide additional support, and hopefully people are willing to come with to us with questions and ideas as they're working on all this work. And then the last thing I want to talk about is just some of the high-level recommendations that we had for what agencies can do now, and where we saw some of the biggest gaps. So one of them is to designate a person to be responsible for privacy. So like I mentioned at the very beginning, there has been an improvement in this. But even if someone's job is not solely privacy, it really creates a lot of accountability for there to be one person who is designated as the point person for those types of topics. And that helps both within the agency, and then it also helps to be able to reach out to OPDP to make sure that we have that single point of contact and we're not getting different messages from different people within a single agency. The next one is to provide more tailored training. We do have a lot of agencies that have implemented training, but for the most part, it appears to be generic training, which again doesn't enable staff to really understand what they're supposed to do with the specific information that they have access to and specific laws that apply to their agency. The next one is to adopt a breach assessment template. Again, we had less than half of agencies that have some type of assessment template, and this is an area where we have good news because OPDP published a template that incorporates our state breach notification laws and the factors that should be considered in making those determinations. So if you're an agency that doesn't have this in place, I'd recommend starting by taking a look at that and reaching out to us if you have questions about implementing it. We recommend that agencies take steps towards developing a data map or data inventory. This is one that can definitely be a big undertaking, but again, it's really foundational to being able to successfully protect the information you have. And then the last one is just to adopt standards for published data. We know that there are obviously a lot of agencies that take their private information that they maintain and turn it into data products that are consumable by the public. And agencies are taking the privacy obligations seriously when they do that, but they don't always have actual policies or standards in place that control what that published data should look like to make sure that people aren't being identified. So that's the last slide here, and so I think I will pause for any questions before I turn it over to Katy.
So this is Angela. I don't see anything in the chat box yet. So if anybody has any questions, they can unmute themselves and ask.
Okay. Well, thanks everyone, and I guess I'll turn it over to Katy.
Oh. Thanks, Matt. Angela, can you give me the ball?
Yeah, hold on just a sec.
So I'll just start off my remarks while we're getting transition to my slide deck. This is a report that was submitted to the legislature a few days ago. And just want to make sure you're seeing my correct screen here. You got it there?
Yeah, it looks good.
Okay, great. So the Office of Privacy and Data Protection is actually required in statute to submit a performance report every 4 years to the legislature. So the 4-year mark happened to be this year. And so we put together this report, and the report is actually posted on both the privacy site and the OCIO website. So you can find it there. But this presentation is to go over some of the findings in the report and to talk about upcoming initiatives for our office. So the core of the Office of Privacy and Data Protection functions really land around 7 requirements. As you can see, the first 5 are state agency report or support, and number 1 is the annual privacy review that Matt just went over in detail. And just to be clear, that report is also linked in this report, and it's also posted on our website. So other requirements include training, the privacy principles, which we got done this year, coordinating data protection with WATEC, and then participating in review of major state IT projects that involve PII, and then for local government, promoting best practices, including training, and then some consumer support requirements as well. So I won't spend much time on this because we just had a very thorough presentation on this report, but it's on our website. And I encourage you all to take a look at it if you're interested in some of the data in detail. I did want to highlight, as Matt said, we had 84% of agencies that responded to the privacy assessment survey this year, which was terrific. So training this year, I think several of you have been participating in several of our trainings, which have included the data breach notification law, facial recognition, contact tracing, decoding de-identification for public agencies, the Public Records Act and privacy, and then our most recent one was the Keep Washington Working Act. And Matt did say in our privacy assessment survey, we got good feedbacks on having these regular trainings when we're not having our state agency privacy forum meeting. And our goal this year is to continue the cadence with these regular webinars and training on privacy topics. And so I just want to encourage everyone to continue to send us topics that you would like to see specific trainings on. So one of our big accomplishments this year was formalizing the privacy principles, which are really foundational, I think, for some of our strategic initiatives next year. And I won't go into these in depth because those are also posted on our website, and we've had presentations about those in this forum as well. But I'm really proud of this accomplishment, and one of the things that I want to highlight for these is that they are actually grounded in principles in the GDPR, which is the General Data Protection Regulation out of Europe, the UN principles, and the Fair Information principles. So I appreciate everybody's stakeholder work this year in getting these done, and I think having this foundation will help us build more mature privacy programs across the state. So another part of our responsibility is to coordinate with data protection in WATEC, and these are both slides from the NIST privacy framework, but it just demonstrates the importance of coordinating privacy with cybersecurity. I have really built up a strong relationship with our Chief Information Security Officer, and I have been engaged in a lot of the incidents and initiatives that are going on in his office right now to make sure that on the privacy side of the house, we're aligning our projects and initiatives with his, and then also remaining in close contact for those times when incidents occur. Another part of our requirement under statute is promoting best practices and training for local government. And I was able to present to the Association of Washington Cities this year and Association of County and City Information Systems on the data breach notification law. Those were very well received. I also, this didn't get into the report, just for I presented to IPMA, Information Processing Management Association, and then I'm in contact with WISAMA, which is the Washington Association with cities. So we're doing our best to work with local government as well, and we hope to increase engagement with those communities this year as well. So I think Matt mentioned that we also have the data breach assessment form on our website, and that is intended to be used by both state and local government because the state law on data breach applies the same to both entities, both types of entities. And it is in Word version. I wanted to make a note of that on our website. So it's meant to be editable. You can put your logo on it and make changes to it as needed, but it does have all of the requirements from 4256-590, which is the state's data breach notification law. Another accomplishment this year, which we highlighted in the report, was that we launched our new privacy website that came out in June. It's at watech.wa.gov/privacy. It formerly was privacy.wa.gov, and that should continue to redirect you to our site. But if you haven't been to that website, please go out there and check out some of the resources we have. Oh, shoot, consumer reports. Hold on, I just realized that I have an incorrect slide deck up. Just a second. So for the consumer support, we didn't have a lot this year, but we were able to create tips for Wi-Fi, safely using Wi-Fi, and that initiative was tied to the drive-in hotspots that the governor launched along with, I think, Department of Commerce. And so we were really proud of the fact that we were able to also get that translated into 35 languages. So let me make sure I'm on the right slide. Also, going back in history a bit for the consumer piece, when the office was originally started, there was a lot of concentration on privacy for consumers, and there was the Privacy Guide for Washington Citizens that was produced early on in the Office of Privacy and Data Protection's existence. And it was also presented and distributed when we were able to go out into the community to libraries and senior centers and other conferences that the office was able to attend. So, and then just lastly here, we did release instructions about video conferencing best practices, and that was early on in the pandemic for privacy considerations there. And that was in coordination with the Office of Cybersecurity as well. So the next part of the report that I'm going to talk about is the performance measures that we covered in the report. So there were performance measures that were set in 2016 and were put into the 2017 report that was given to the legislature, and they were on these 6 different topics. I will note that the adoption of the privacy modeling tool was one of the performance measures, as well as broadband access, which was a small part of our statute originally. And so we don't have performance measures to report on those because the privacy modeling tool was actually decommissioned. It was created based on grant funds. And then when there weren't funds available to keep the tool up to date, it had to be decommissioned for security reasons. And then for broadband access, this was really, it was put in statute that it was an optional piece of our office's work based on existing resources. And then once that work was transferred to the Department of Commerce, it was not something that we were monitoring or directly involved in anymore, other than to support Commerce's work. So for the 4 remaining, I guess, performance measures that we had data on. So the baseline data was set in 2017, and that information, those targets were set based on information from 2016. So We're reporting, just to remind you, on a 4-year period. So the baseline in 2017 was set at 780. The target set was 1425 by this year, and I'm happy to report that we hit 1812 in terms of the number of government employees trained during this past year. So in spite of some of the challenges, we were able to meet the target that was set in 2016 there. So you'll notice in 2019 was a little bit low, but for those of you that might be aware of the history of the office, there was a transition that was occurring then, and the office was, I think, one person and didn't have a privacy officer for most of 2019. So consumer outreach, this is an area that was, I think I mentioned, more challenging for us this year. So the baseline was set in 2017 at 70,000, and this was due, I think, to a new website that got a lot of hits initially. That was how the metrics were, I guess, calculated. So the target was set at 85,000, and for 2020, our data was a little under 5,000. So we didn't quite hit that target, but we did come up a bit. I would say this was another area where the website was down for several months until we got the new one launched. And so this is actually only a snapshot of a piece of the 2020 data because we didn't have a website for several months in 2020. So that will be an area for improvement. Another area goal that was set in 2016 was the coverage, which seems sort of quaint now given the past year that we've been living in, but that was in terms of getting out to different communities and a broad base of I think effort in terms of engaging with different types of communities. And that was some of the early effort that the office was able to do with some of the consumer outreach in terms of senior centers and libraries and that type of thing. So it was set in 2016, they had 6. So then the target was set at 20. So, but as you can see through the 4-year period, we actually went down quite a bit. And so I only did trainings in Olympia in early 2020, and then everything since then has been virtual. So we haven't really figured out, we didn't really measure where people are logging in from for our webinars and website, but this is going to be a metric that we take a closer look at in terms of making sure it's more targeted for the circumstances that we're in. So another performance metric that was set in 2016 was the open data piece, which isn't actually part of our statute, but part of our office's responsibility. So baseline was set that I think 20 agencies had open data plans in 2016. The target was set at 30, and the 2020 data we have is 36 agencies actually have open data plans now, so that was one where we could show some increase. So based on all of this information and what we've been working on this past year, part of our priorities and initiatives are going to be creating a privacy framework, which includes policies and processes to implement the state agency privacy principles. I have some fun news in regards to that initiative and the one for developing a privacy impact assessments. We have held an RFP and are getting ready to hire a privacy consultant. So we did get permission to spend a little bit of money on a contractor to help us with some of these initiatives, because I think, as you know, the office right now is just Matt and I. And so that's also one of our initiatives is to help build capacity in our office. And we do have a decision package on that. So I have to say I'm looking forward to seeing the governor's budget that comes out today. And then also, as a benefit for state and local government, we want to be able to develop training modules that can be used by agencies. And we're looking at some possible outside help on that as well. So I think that covers the entire highlights of the performance report. As I said, if you want more details about any of that, it's posted on our website and has been submitted to the legislature. So we're happy to take any questions about either of our reports now. And sorry about the accidentally having the wrong slide deck open. Are there any questions?
I don't have any.
This is Dale, Department of Veterans. Are the slides that you have presented available afterwards?
Yes, they'll be, Angela usually sends them out, I believe, to the listserv.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.